Welcome to the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This podcast is dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like all the best bookshops, this podcast is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. So tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book at the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. I'm Stacey Horan, author, book lover, and host of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This is episode number 269. For more information about this or any of our episodes, go to my website, staceyhoran.com. If you enjoy the podcast, leave us a review, like us on social media, and share us with your friends, family, and fellow readers. In today's episode of The Bookshop at the End of the Internet, I'm joined by author Evan Kidwell to discuss his debut fantasy novel, Timeaous Spark and the Luck Curse. This first installment in a new series introduces a world where magic is unlocked through brutal trials, and the abilities revealed determine one's place in a rigid class system. Timeaous Spark discovers that his magic, known as minor luck, is a power society views as dangerous. His journey forces him to decide whether to accept the role he's been assigned or fight for the life he wants. Evan wrote this story with themes of bullying and self-discovery in mind, drawing on his own childhood experiences and the advice that helped him through them. And although this is his first book, he's been inventing characters and worlds in his head since he was a kid. And some of those characters finally make their debut in this novel. In this episode, I'll chat with Evan about his writing journey, the moment at a work conference that pushed him to finally write the book, and the people in his life who encouraged him to keep going, as well as a few other things. Coming up. Evan Kidwell, thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast.
Absolutely. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Stacey.
I thought what we could do today is start by talking about your debut novel, Timeaous Spark and the Luck Curse. If you don't mind, tell us a little bit about this book.
Sure.
And what inspired you to write it.
Yeah, so what inspired me to write it is going to be a longer conversation, which we can definitely dive into. But the book itself is, I have a magical academy world where students go to unlock powers. The powers they unlock come from a series of very intense trials. That is what helps them to unlock their powers sooner rather than later. But that's by design by the government. The government actually wants them to unlock their powers as soon as possible so that they can classify those students into their flawed society hierarchy system as soon as possible. So which powers you unlock or the kids unlock is not actually as important as where they land in that flawed societal hierarchy. So that's a little bit about the book. It's comparable to Harry Potter meets The Hunger Games meets Divergent series. And my main character, Timeaous Spark, actually unlocks a power that could accelerate him in that caste system. But he struggles with that because his mentor explains to him that his power is a dangerous power to society and they may not appreciate his power. So, I have a lot of that kind of world building elements in my book. Going to your first question, actually, which was, how I started writing this book. So there's several things that contributed towards this book. First of all, as a kid growing up, I found myself when I would be walking home from school, my school was several miles away from home. I found myself creating characters that I would interact with on my way home from school, basically imaginary friends for all intents and purposes. Sounds much lamer as an adult, but as a kid, I totally interacted with these characters. And so I didn't write them down. They just lived in my head. I've always had an overactive imagination. And I remember there was a point in time my mom and I were watching the Harry Potter movie, but the Crimes of Grindelwald series, right? It was the second one, and it was the fight scene at the end where there are blue flames swirling around everywhere. And I remember her saying, who thinks of stuff like this? And I remember thinking, well, I do. I've always thought of stuff like this. Like, this is where my brain goes, right? And so that was just more of a token of like, oh, I could do that. But I didn't really take it seriously. It was one of those things that I've always written down on goals in my life, like, oh, I'd love to write a book. And that came more from a desire to like do it, not because I thought I'd make a great book initially, just because, it'd be cool to say I wrote a book. And I then I do keep a dream journal. I have very active dreams, and sometimes I feel like I'm watching a movie inside of my dreams. And so I keep a dream journal. And about 5 years ago, I had the dream that was the premise for this book. And I remember waking up and writing as much as I possibly could coming out of the dream, as much as I can remember in about 45 seconds before you forget your dreams, right? So after I had that initial premise, I kept thinking, man, that'd be a cool book. I can actually incorporate some of those characters I created as a kid because as a kid, my characters that I created all had powers, right? So that would be really fun to do. And I just kept thinking, oh, that would be fun to do. And then I was at a leadership conference at the end of 2023, and I come from the world of insurance, so it's got nothing to do with fantasy or young adult fantasy at all. And the keynote speaker gets up on stage, and he says, "I want everyone to take out a piece of paper. I don't want you to use your phones. I don't want you to use your laptops. I want you to take out a physical piece of paper, and I want everyone to write down something on their piece of paper that scares them." And excites them that they want to accomplish in 2024. And I thought, I would love to write my book. So I wrote that. I wrote my book on my paper. And then he confirms that everybody on has something on their paper. This is a top level leadership conference for the world of insurance. And so, of course, everyone's gotten something written down their paper. Now, I am sitting in the front row, mind you. I try to be a good student in any setting that I'm in. And so he points right at me and he says, "You have something on your paper?" I said, "Yep." And he goes, "Okay, come up on stage." And I was like, oh, great. So, so not that I was afraid to get up on stage, but more that now I have to disclose to 400 of my peers what is on my piece of paper. So I get up on stage and he says, "What did you write on your piece of paper?" And I said, "Write my book." And he goes, "Oh, so like a finance book or an insurance book?" And I was, "No, fantasy." Like that's what I want to do. And so his whole keynote presentation was grilling me on why I wanted to write my book, like what my book was about, what was in my head, all that stuff. And what it really drilled down to was growing up as a kid, I was bullied a bunch as a kid. I was always one of the smallest kids in my class. Just to put in perspective, I did wrestle in high school. I was 98 pounds as a freshman in high school, right? So I was smaller than all the girls too, right? So for the most part, and so I got picked on a bunch as a kid. And reading was my escape from that, right? It was my way out of not having to deal with I'll call it the trials of real life, and I was able to then escape and transport myself to a different world. And that was something that was important to me to create for others to be able to have a similar escape. But I took it one step further and I thought, I want to give people the ability to escape, but I also want to equip them with some of the tools I had to learn along the way in reference to things like resilience to really make that mission shine and not just about escaping the realities. So I get off stage from this event. And again, I'm in front of my mentors, my peers, people that I have a lot of respect for in the industry. And one of my peers actually said, "You know what this means, right?" And I said, "What?" He said, "You've already qualified for this event next year, which means you can't show up to this same event next year without a book." So I was like, dang it, you're right. And I will say this. So hats off to the keynote speaker who had this conversation, because if I had not actually announced this to the world that this was something I was going to do, and then now 400 people are keeping me accountable throughout the year, anytime I'd have conversations with them, they'd be like, "How's your book coming?" Right? What's going on with your book? And so if I didn't have that level of accountability and I had just written it down for myself, I probably wouldn't be having this conversation with you today. So that's my entrance into the world of authorship. I absolutely love it. I wrote the book from a philosophy of would I want to read this book, and I really enjoy not only the characters that I developed in this book, but how the plot paces and moves forward. And I have three kids, so I have a busy life. So I just every day sat down and wrote a little bit every day. Once my kids were in bed, I'd sit down and write. And sometimes I wrote for an hour, sometimes I wrote for 3 hours. But I did accomplish the goal. 3 days prior to that same event the next year, I launched my book on Amazon and went through the whole process, editing everything. And it was a lot more work than I realized it was going to be. But I accomplished the goal that I set out for myself. So,
Very good. Okay. So I'm curious what your colleagues' reaction was when you got up there and said, I want to write a book, and not only a book, but a fantasy book that has nothing to do with why we're all here today.
right. Exactly right.
Did you find people going, oh, yeah, I'd always wanted to write one too, or don't sit in the front row ever again? Or what was the reaction?
It was a little bit of both, actually. I had some people saying, well, that's what you get for sitting in the front row. You'll learn your lesson, right? I had some people say, that's really cool, but almost from a standpoint of like, yeah, that's never going to happen, but good for you, right? And I had some people that were like, that's amazing, Evan. You can do it. We know you can do it, that kind of thing. And it's interesting too, because coming out of that event, I now knew what my goal was. I knew, okay, I have to create a plan of action to get to that goal because it doesn't just happen by accident. It doesn't happen overnight or by magic. Although I wish it did. That'd be great. If I had the ability to just be like, this is what's in my brain and magic, right? Like that,
Right.
that's great. But that's not how it works. But I also had some major naysayers in the very beginning stages of this. I had one guy who said, and he's been an author, and he said, "Well, do you have your MFA?" And I said, "What's that?" Right? Like, I don't know what that is, right? And he goes, "A master's in fine arts." And I said, "Nope, I don't got that." And he goes, "Then you're not writing a book this year." And that was one of the things that actually spurred me on the most. Because, like, you know what? Watch me. Don't tell me I can't go do something that I'm passionate about, that I care about, that I enjoy, right? And just because I don't have some fancy degree doesn't mean I don't have these stories that live in my head, right? And so I did prove him wrong, and he did say, same guy said, if you do write something, it's not going to be something of quality. I have yet to have anybody say my book's bad. I think that a lot of people really enjoy my book and they enjoy the pacing, and so I really believe in my book and what I've created and the series that I'm working on. So I had the naysayers. I also had people that would kind of latch on to the idea around, well, we'll wait and see. We'll just see if it's something you do. It's great to say. It's great to, kind of have this ideal in your head, but so many times these days, people say they're going to go do something, don't actually do it. And so I try not to let that be me. When I say I'm going to do something, I try to accomplish it. But usually I don't say out loud in public to 400 people that I'm doing something. So yeah. So no, I had a mixed bag. I will say though, at that same event the next year, that same event actually did make a plug towards me. They said, "Hey, everybody remembers that he made this goal last year." Well, some of the people remembered, some of the people didn't. Some of the people were like, "I don't remember what you're talking about." But they said, "Yeah, well, he did it," and they showed my book title and they said, "You can go buy it on Amazon." It wasn't the reason we were there, but it was a fun moment to say, "Yes, I did that. I said I
Right.
was going to do it, and I accomplished it." So,
Right. Right. Well done
thank you.
for for a number of things. For one, writing your very first book and putting it out in the world in a year's time span, which is hard for a lot of writers to do, even those who have been writing for a long time. So, congratulations on that. Congratulations
Thank you.
on getting up and announcing that, sharing that goal, that desire to create art to a bunch of people who probably were not there even thinking about art at that day. So, so congratulations on being brave enough to do that. And then congratulations on also not listening to the naysayers. I mean,
Mhm.
it hurts my heart a little to hear people say things like that. Like you can't, you won't, or you might, but it won't be any good. So
Right.
congratulations to not listening to that. I'm curious about the people in your life who were the sort of countering voice
Hmm.
to those who were either in the negative camp or in the lukewarm reserving judgment camp. So who were your cheerleaders going
Yeah.
into this?
Yeah. So first of all, I have to give a shout out to my wife. I'm almost married for 10 years now. And my wife has always been supportive on anything I've decided I wanted to do. And she is a amazing mother and she's a stay-at-home mom. And there have been moments where she knew or she would take it on herself, like, hey, I'll deal with the kids in bed because I know you've got to start writing and stuff. So she was probably my biggest supporter was my wife. I will say, when you find a good woman in your life and you find a good partner, it makes a big difference in the things you're trying to accomplish for sure. So that's for sure one. And then I actually got a writing coach at the very early start of all of this. Now, my writing coach, he goes by the pen name of D.D. Black. He has about 16 or 17 novels out in the world of mystery. Now, my book is not mystery, but he had already done what I was setting out to accomplish. My father was a big proponent of advocacy for me. He's always been a mentor for me, but he was the one that actually gifted me this writing coach class that I took. And it was a class with others. But the nice thing is, this particular individual made himself available to me for additional questions I had. He gave me a lot of really good feedback right out of the gate that allowed me to sit down and write and sit down and do it well. One of the very first things he told me was he said, the best way to write a book is to write a book. And at first I was like, I mean, that sounds logical, right? But what do you mean by that? Like that doesn't actually tell me anything. And he said, everyone is so hyper if you're going to be in the world of writing, you're so hyper a lot of people are hyper fixated on how to make the book perfect. He goes, don't worry about that. Just write a little bit every day. You can make it perfect in editing, right? Get it on paper, get your manuscript, your first draft done. Your first draft is going to suck. You're never going to produce your first draft and have no edits, but you can cut things out later that you need to cut out. And so that's what I did. And there were a significant number of scenes that ended up getting cut from my book because it was just too much fluff and it just didn't go anywhere. It didn't progress the storyline. There was also instances where I really struggled in the very beginning of my process. I know this is going expounding more on your question than what you asked, right? But I remember there were moments in time where I wasn't sure what to do because I wanted to be a kind of a magical academy where they go to school and they learn things, right? Much like a Harry Potter. But I didn't want it to come across as Harry Potter. So I actually started the first part of the manuscript as they were commuting back and forth to school. And he came back and said, yeah, there's going to be books out there where kids are commuting, and there's going to be books out where kids live on campus. You make your book what you want it to make it. There's going to be, don't ever take someone's idea, but basically all those kinds of ideas, whether you're commuting or not, already exist, right? So at the end of the day, make it what you want it to be and be proud of what you're putting out there, and don't settle for, trying to do it completely unique, different than anybody's ever done it, because it doesn't exist. Like, mysteries are out there, fantasies are out there, young adult are out there, right? Like, just make it what you want it to be. And so between his coaching and his guidance, and between my wife and my father, those are probably the three that I would call out the most, helping me. I also have to give a shout out to there's a woman named Amanda who actually became like my very first ARC reader. And so Amanda, she actually was a creative writing. She had a creative writing career for a period of time. Now she actually works in the world of insurance as well. And so she told me, she goes, I don't know if you know this, but I have a creative writing background. I would love to give you some insight on, what's working, what's not working with your book. So I brainstormed a lot of stuff with her along the way, because here's what I'm thinking, here's what I want to do long term, here's where the series is going to go. And so she allowed me to really get my ideas out of my head and then officially onto paper by just bouncing those ideas off with her as well. So those are the top four that really stood by me. And I think going back to my wife for a second, there was a point in time where I was taking feedback from everybody because I was trying to make it the best book possible. And my wife finally stopped that and she said, you need to do what you think is right for you and stop taking advice from everybody else. You're the one writing the book. You know what you like in a book. Stick with that and stop focusing on, getting advice from 15, 20, 30 different people at a time. And so then I limited it back down to my ARC reader, my wife, who doesn't like fantasy at all. It's actually funny. My wife even said, I'll never read your book. I'm really proud of you, but I'll never read your book because I don't like to read. But if it ever turned into a movie, I'll watch your movie. I said, okay, fair. So, but she gave me some really good advice along the way, and then obviously my father and my writing coach.
Well, you're lucky to have so many cheerleaders,
Yeah.
vocal ones who were close to you. So, congratulations on that. I'd like to talk a little bit about the world building, if you
Hmm.
don't mind,
Yeah.
because obviously it plays a huge part in the book. So, can you tell us a little bit about how it came to be? In particular, I'm curious how you decided what was important in this
Hmm.
world, what you would focus on. Did you make a list of, I must have this, I really don't want to spend time talking about that. In my world, magic will behave this way.
Right.
And so the caste system will look exactly like this. And was that done up front? I mean, knowing you only had a year to do this, how much was done up front and how much were you doing on the fly?
Almost all of it was on the fly. What I will say though is the caste system that exists actually came from that dream. So
Ah,
I literally had it mapped out already of what the caste system would look like from the dream. And so I made some slight changes to that, but for the most part, that stayed true. From a world building perspective, there were several things that were really important to me. And actually, I will give some insight because it is called the luck curse. I'm not really giving a spoiler away, but my main hero, I actually wanted to create a power that made sense with the world or the idea around resilience. And so, how do I turn resilience into a power, a superpower almost? Well, I turned it into, I call it in my book, minor luck. And think of minor luck as like a yin and a yang, right? If something bad happens, something good is going to happen, but it's not always reciprocal in the sense that you could have something really bad happen and then have something minorly good happen, right? My main character actually sees this as a curse, and his mentor in the book basically says, don't let anybody know about this because it can be an unbalancing of the scales that exist, right? Which breaks the societal system. And so that was his big struggle. So I knew I wanted powers in my book, but I also wanted to go one step further than just people unlocking powers. If I'm talking about a magical academy, I incorporate things like magic and technology. My magic does come from powers. However, it goes a layer deeper. So I actually got this idea from my daughter, who's 4. My daughter has blue eyes, like bluer than blue. Okay. And my wife and I both have brown eyes. And I understand that genetics, how they function, right, means sometimes you don't know exactly what you're going to get. Okay. So I figured, what if I treated my power system in the same way that genetics works in the real world? Now, my book is a parallel world to ours. I did that on purpose. It's not like Harry Potter where you can enter to this parallel world from our world. It is a complete parallel world. I did that because I wanted the freedom to make my book and have the rules of my book be what I wanted them to be and not be stuck by the rules of what our society demands. But I thought, hey, if mythical beings of old actually did at any point in time pass their powers on to human beings, then those human beings could pass those powers along, through blood. I call it bloodlines. That's the caste system that exists, right? Through bloodlines over time. So I actually have instances in my book, for example, where 2 angel bloods actually give birth to a fairy blood, for example. And that causes its own conflict because they basically outcast their own daughter because she has these powers that aren't in that higher bloodline echelon tier. Okay. I also wanted to make it clear that you don't necessarily have to have powers. There are non-powered individuals in my books. I call them non-Crees, like non-creatures, right? You don't necessarily have to have powers to do good things, right? And so, things like friendship and resilience can overcome not having powers, which is very big theme in my book as well. So that is a little bit around the world building. So I took it from mythical beings of old have passed their powers on to human beings over time, and the human beings have passed those powers on via genetics, which means it's implied, but it's never outright spoken this way in my book, that all the powers that could exist are already known, right? If they've been passed along through a genealogy, right? And so that's why once you unlock a power, it's very clear which where you sit in that hierarchy system, right? And so that's the idea behind the world building. But I did also include, so if mythical beings of old could give powers to human beings, there could be magical components in my book, for example, magical places that exist where mythical beings of old also transition their powers to those magical places. So I incorporated those kinds of things. I have enchanted gardens. I have something called a magic vein, which is like a cave-like system in the first book. And so I also wanted it to be clear that it's not just for lack of a better term, an X-Men scenario where there are powered individuals, not powered individuals. There is a magical component to my world as well. So,
Well, and you mentioned first book. So this is a series, and my
yes,
question to you is, do you have it all planned out? Do you know
I do.
how many books you do? Okay, and you know how it
Yeah,
ends.
I know how it ends.
Okay.
Yes. So I do know how it ends. I have the next two books mapped out in my head of like what needs to happen for the books to move forward. I also, one of the things I did in the first book, very similar to like a Harry Potter, for example, is I did not leave readers on a major cliffhanger where the book didn't seem to finalize and now you're itching for the next book. I get that that is a strategy. I just did not at least do it in my first book. I can't guarantee it's not going to happen in the future, but I didn't do it in my first book because I wanted it to be a book that could stand on its own if nobody read any of the rest of the series. But I also heavily hinted, I mean, I'm speaking it now, but I heavily hinted in the book that there was going to be a book two. So I finalized for the most part everything, but I also left enough of I want to read the next one and desire to continue on in the series. But yeah, so I actually do know where this is going to end. And that's why I do believe this is going to be a 7 or 8 book series, just because I know what I need to do, at least each book. That's my goal. But I do know for sure the next two, where it's going to land, where it's going to end, what's going to happen to the different, I'll call it to a handful of characters that I know certain things are going to happen. It's in my head. Now I just have to get out of my head and onto paper, right?
Mm.
So,
What's the difference now for you between having written book one and that's
mhm.
done and out, and now having to embark on book two and eventually book three? Obviously, you have not announced book two to 400 people at a conference, but what do you do now for
Yeah.
this next one?
Yep. So first of all, one, I've already done it. So I know I can do it
Mm.
again. That's the first step is like, I already know that's possible. And when I think back on during my writing journey, like I celebrated every milestone. I remember celebrating with my parents, like I hit 25,000 words. Like for me, that was a huge deal. I'd never written that many words in my life, right? So I'd always told stories. I loved telling stories, but I had never written a story down to be 25,000 words. My book landed at initially it was like 120 something thousand words. We cut out a bunch and it landed at 105,000 words. So one, I know I can do it. Two, I know that for me to do it, I just have to take a little bit of action every single day towards it. Okay. So I'm treating the next book in the same way. I would like to launch book two, but at the beginning of January of this next year, 2027. That's intentional because I live in the Pacific Northwest. I went to the Portland Fan Expo this last January. It was a great event. I was in between two fantastic authors, in between both of them. One had 5 books she had written, one had 14 books he had written. And I was watching them sell bundles of their books. Here's 14 books, right? Here's 5 books. And hey, here's my one book, right? So I knew I was like, when I come back to this event next year, I want to have my next book ready to go so that I can do the same kind of thing. I think for me, one of the things that I'm really having to learn in this space that is different than just writing the book or even editing the book, even though I've done it and I can do it again, is the marketing. I'm learning that in the world of insurance, it's such a compliant driven world, which means I was never actually allowed to market, which meant it was never something I was trying to learn. Even though I'm a millennial, I've just never had to do it. I've been in the insurance industry for 11 years now. And so it's a very different world, and figuring out what people want to see, what people don't want to see, or what will actually gain more traction for my book. That is also a mission I'm focused on right now, in addition to writing book two. So that's my big one. And so in 2026, I'm hoping to launch audiobook for book one. I just redid my character banners per the author to the right of me gave me the feedback. Make sure you do some character art, put that into your banners, all that kind of stuff. And so I'm redoing my banners right now for shows. I'm also going to I've applied for up to 15 different shows, mostly local in the area here, which I haven't done before either, right? So even though this book came out at the end of 2024, I did have some life stuff hit me in 2025 that really took my focus away for a little bit. And so now I'm really gearing up and treating it like this is the year that I've launched my book, even though it came out a year ago. And that also came from the feedback from the author to the right of me was like, go to your small shows, go to the bazaars, go to, the things that don't feel like they're going to get you sales, because it's about getting traction. It's about getting noticed and people recognizing your brand and your book and hopefully build up a following enough to the point where when I launch book two, I can have pre-orders. The only other thing I'll mention, if it's helpful to people, is I have found some really good success sponsoring book clubs. So a sponsor of a book club means I'll give a couple free copies of the book club to your book club, and then I'll actually do a Zoom with that book club after everyone's done reading the book, and I'll meet the author session where they can ask me questions, and if they want spoilers into future books, I can certainly give that. So I've had some really good success in that space, and so I'm more than happy to sponsor a book club if it's something somebody wants to pursue. So,
And are you finding interest from young adults themselves or just generally readers of young adult books?
yeah, so I've had a mix of both. When I went to my most recent event, I remember I think I'm getting more traction with the parents than I am with the students themselves, which is fine. I remember though, the person to the right of me was a romanticy, and she has some smut in her book or some spice or whatever you want to call it. And I remember the mom asking her, "Does your book have spice?" And she goes, "Yes, it has some spice." And she goes, "Dang, I have a 13-year-old daughter, 14-year-old daughter, and I don't want that." And so the author to the right of me said, "Well, check out Evan's book because he has zero spice." And I think that's, for me, that was really important because I wouldn't want, so I have a 7-year-old and 4-year-old, and I wouldn't want my, call it 7-year-old, if he was 12, for example, reading a book with a bunch of spice. I just wouldn't. Like, I wouldn't have wanted to read that as a kid. My parents certainly wouldn't have wanted me to read it. So I'm finding a lot of success or traction with the parents of teenagers, actually, which is great. And I'm very clear. Like, my book has no spice. I'm not putting any hints of it in there, and does that mean it's always going to be true? I don't know, but my guess is if I included that kind of stuff in the future, I would make sure it was not, it was more like a hidden message than it was like, they went into the bedroom by themselves kind of thing, and leave it
Right.
at that. Like, I don't need to involve spice into my book or my series. It is young adult. Really that's, ages, call it 13 or 12 to 18 range, 19 range. And so I'm sticking to those guns, and so I'm getting a lot of even locally in my own community. I had somebody say that to the Facebook world, like, "Oh, I wish we could find a good book for my child that doesn't have any of this," because a lot of books have that kind of stuff these days. And my wife pinged me and she's like, my husband just wrote a book and it doesn't have any of that, right? So I think that would be my number one target right now is the parents of teenagers. I certainly find teenagers picking up my book at shows too, but usually they don't have the money to buy the book. Then they go with their parents and then I have to sell their parents too. So
Right, right. And kudos to the author sitting next to you
yes,
to
both of
direct
them actually. Yeah,
traffic to you.
they were both fantastic at that show. The one to the left, the one to the right. We were the only I think there were four authors at that event, but we were basically all together, and so we did a good job of kind of playing along with each other. Like if someone was looking for a spice, well, mine has none, but you should go over here. And so, and they gave me some of the best author feedback I've heard since I started. So I really appreciated both of their wisdoms.
Yeah. Were you surprised by how congenial the author community was? Was that something you knew or expected when you got into
It's
it?
not something I've experienced yet because at other events I wasn't by other authors. And so, it was kind of like they'd have one author here and one author here. And the very first event I did last year, 2025, I went to Emerald City Comic Con, which is, in Seattle. And they have a whole writer's block in that event. And I didn't actually get into that event because by the time I'd launched my book, they had already filled their writer's block section. So I actually paid pretty handsomely for just a straight floor spot. Well, straight floor spot means I'm in between, video game creators and actual comics and, that kind of stuff. And so I was not with other authors. So I had not actually experienced that yet, but it was a breath of fresh air to actually experience it. It was almost like we're all in this together and we're all trying to move the world of authorship forward together. And it was not I'm going to talk to them and not you. Like that's not the vibe I got from these other two authors who are obviously both very successful. So
Right, right. Well, I'm glad you got to experience that. Hopefully that will be you'll experience more of that. Hopefully that will be the case for you at these other
yeah,
events.
that's the hope, right? I live in a tiny little town called Sequim, Washington. If you looked up Sequim on a map, you would not realize that it says Sequim, right? It's spelled Sequim. So if you're not from the area, everyone pronounces it Sequim. But it is a tiny little town on the peninsula of Washington, which means I'm about 2 hours away from the Seattle, Tacoma area. And so I'm in a small town and I don't get to experience that kind of camaraderie with other authors unless I'm at an event and unless they're next to me. So it was really a breath of fresh air for sure.
Yeah, good.
And I'll tell you long-term goals, since I'm all about saying something and then walking towards it, is long-term goals. I would love to have one or more of my books become New York Times bestseller. And I think I can do that in book two because I know what I need to do better from book one. And I'm doing the things I need to do to make that happen. So
Good, good. Well, you have a plan.
I have a plan.
Now you just have to find all the time necessary to carry it out.
Yes, exactly
Easy,
right.
easy
Yeah,
to do.
sure. Easy. Wife, three kids, a full-time job, and writing, and marketing, and
Right,
right.
right.
So
No problem.
no problem.
All right. Well, if people want to, along those lines, if people want to learn more about you and the books and look for the new release when it's available and find out where you're going to be, that kind of thing, where should they
Yeah.
go for you and that information?
Yeah, so I'll start with Instagram. That's where I'm most busy right now. I have, so Evan underscore Kidwell underscore author is my Instagram page. Unfortunately, for some reason, I'm not able to use Threads anymore. But I guess I was overly active on Threads, but I do have an Instagram page. And then same thing with Facebook. I have Evan Kidwell author. They don't allow underscores on the Facebook pages. And I do have a website, timeousspark.com. So those are kind of the places to find me from a social media standpoint. Feel free to sign up for my email newsletter as well if you want news on what's coming, where I'm going to be, all that kind of stuff. So those are the top three places to find me: is Facebook, Instagram, and my website.
Excellent. And if people want to purchase a copy of Timeaous Spark and the Luck Curse, where should they go to buy it?
The best place right now is actually Amazon. If you type Timeaous Spark, it's Timeaous Spark. into Amazon, it will pull up for you. I do have my books in like the online portals for Barnes and Noble, so you could certainly go there or any of the places you might find books like Apple, all those places. But the number one place that I'm seeing traffic is Amazon right now. I did get 8 different categories when I first launched of Amazon number one bestseller. So, I've got some good traction there. I do have it on Books Buy as well, books.buy as well. So really pretty much anywhere that you could think of, as long as you spell it correctly, I think that's the people's biggest hurdle, right? So as long as you spell it correctly, you should be able to find it just about any of your retailers. Your own local bookstores can buy it through because it's on Ingram Spark and stuff. So whatever, if you want to support your local bookstores, go to your local bookstore, ask where they'll order it for you. So that's those are the best ways.
Right. Ask them to order 2 copies, actually.
Actually, ask them to order 2 copies so the next person can enjoy it too. That's right.
Or 10.
10. That's right.
Right. Good. Well, Evan, I want to thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast. And I want to wish you luck with Timeaous Spark and the Luck Curse and writing book 2 and all the other things you have going on. Congratulations on everything you've accomplished so far, and best of luck with the rest of your writing journey.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
The Bookshop at the End of the Internet is a podcast dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like any good bookshop, this podcast features a wide variety of books by the equally varied and interesting authors who felt compelled to write them. This podcast gives you a chance to meet these wonderful writers and discover your next must-read book. Listen to the authors describe their books and tell you their stories in their own words. My interviews feature books from all genres and authors from all walks of life, including those who are indie published as well as those published by small presses and large publishing houses. Looking for unique, not so easy to find books for yourself, a friend, or a book club? Tune into this podcast and find your newest favorite author or maybe a soon-to-be bestseller. This podcast, like all the best bookshops, is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. Tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book. You never know what treasures you might find in the Bookshop at the End of the Internet.